Good morning.
Morning.
You don't know me. Not many people do. You see, I came from a well-to-do family in Virginia. I had 7 children, as you can see. And I was an accomplished pianist, which means that I played the piano. I played the piano. Little did I know that I was soon about to begin a long journey down a long road where my health was going to go down mentally and physically with the deaths of so many of my children. That was kind of common back then. Only 2 of the 7 were going to survive, and those 2 were going to become influential American women in government. So I had how many children? 7 children. How many lived?
2.
Only 2. At the age of 22, I was a widowed heiress with a son. I'm better known for the accomplishments of my second husband. He, too, is from a well-known family in Virginia. He learned a skilled trade. He was an accomplished musician, but he didn't play the piano. He played the violin. And he was very well educated. We met in January, and we were married in January of 1772. We finally made it home in the midst of a freezing cold snowstorm. We were so surprised when we got there. You know what we found? We found that there was no food in the house. There was no fire, and it gets cold in Virginia. And there was no one to help us unload. So we knew then that it was going to be, that our love was one that was going to last a lifetime. It was really strong. We kind of laughed about it a little bit as we got older. Thomas, my husband, was very well educated, and he went to William and Mary College, and he studied law. When you study law, what do you become? A lawyer. You can become a governor. You can do a lot of different things when you study law. So he studied law, and he was part of a very special group of men, and he later on was part of Congress. He was known as the man with eloquent words, but yet he wasn't a public speaker. So does that make a lot of sense if he was eloquent with words, but he didn't like to talk? What do you think he might have done if he liked to use words, but he didn't talk? Allison?
Wrote them down.
He may have written them down. That's exactly what he liked to do. So he was known as the man with eloquent words, and yet he wasn't a public speaker. He was very educated, and he was known as the silent member of Congress. So he didn't like to speak very much. But you know what's funny? His words were words that would be remembered for centuries. Such words as, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and some of these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Have you ever heard those before?
No.
No? Well, you will later. You will definitely know those later. You may know him. His name was Thomas. He wrote the Declaration of Independence.
Myself.
And he wrote another very important bill that secured religious freedom. But about this time when he was doing all of this stuff in the government, I got really, really sick. Remember me telling you that at the beginning? I got really sick because what was happening? I was having a lot of babies. And my body could not handle all the stress and the strain of having all of those babies. And then, if you just even think about it, all the heartache and how sad you would be if your babies had died, that was happening to me. So soon after that, I died. Thomas loved me so much when I was sick, though, that he gave up his position in Congress. He resigned his job. That's a really big deal. He resigned everything that he did in Congress, and he left, and he moved, and he took a position of governor so that he could be really close to our 2 daughters, Martha and Mary, and close to myself. When he came, he even turned down a position to get to travel to France and to get to be the commissioner in France. Isn't that a huge deal? He could have gone to France, and he could have learned all about France, and he said, "No, my wife is sick. I need to be home with my family." What a wonderful man. Soon after that, I had to run out of my house because the British were coming and they invaded my home in Monticello. I had an infant baby. An infant's just a brand new born. We had to run all the way to Richmond to get away. We barely escaped them coming in and taking over our house. We almost were there. We barely got out. But we did. It was sad, but we did. But soon after that, I died. So I've come back to talk to you guys. Soon after that, I died. Thomas locked himself in his room for 3 weeks. And all he did was pace the floor. All day. All night until he was so tired, he would just go to bed. Then he'd wake up the next day, and he'd pace. Does that sound fun? No. Why do you think he did that? Hudson, what do you think?
I don't know, but he will mind.
He was maybe mad? What do you think, Charity?
I have a question.
Okay, can you hold it?
Yes.
What you think, Ben?
He was sad.
He was sad. His heart was broken. He'd lost a lot of his family, and now his wife was dead. Soon after that, he decided, okay, well, he accepted that position. Remember, he had turned down a position to go to a really important place. Where was it? France. He had accepted that position now to go to France as commissioner. And while he was there, he learned all about the French culture. He learned all about French government. And he loved to read books. He was always reading books. So, he was there for a while, and he did later call for our daughters to go with him and stay with him there. When he came back, he was the Secretary of State under George Washington. He was the Vice President under John Adams, and he was the 3rd President of the United States of America. That was a really big deal. I know he's my husband, but that was a really big deal. Okay? He was the very first one that took over as president where they transferred powers from one party to another party. So there were 2 different views, and they transferred what was one party's view. When he took over, he had a completely different view. But you know what? There was no fighting. There was no one upset. There was no one who was running after people and causing riots. It was peaceful. And that was a really big deal because we just recently gotten out of a war, and we did not want a monarchy, right? What kind of government did we want? A republic or a democracy, yes. So that's what we had. We had a peaceful transfer of power. In his very first presidency, he was very supportive of Lewis and Clark as they were doing some expeditions and trying to travel out west and see what all was there because we didn't really know. And he was able to purchase the Louisiana Territory, which is a big, big, big piece of land. His second presidency was pretty well marked because he was trying to stay neutral, which means he didn't want to get involved with foreign conflicts. There were issues going on at the time with Great Britain, and there were issues going on at the time with France. And they were not happy with each other, and they were not happy with us. And he was trying to stay out of it. They were upset over taxes. They were upset. Well, England was probably mad because what had just happened. What did America just do? We just won the war. So they were taking people off of ships because they were in a war. And they would say, once the British, once an Englishman, always an Englishman. And they were making them serve in the English army. So we ended up having to get involved with the war with England, with another one. It was called the War of 1812. And he tried so hard to stay out of it, but he just couldn't. So he was trying to stay out of all of his conflicts, but he just wasn't able to do that. Thomas died on July 4th of 1826. He donated many of his books. Remember I said when he was in France, what did he like to do? Read. And he read so much. He had a huge library. He donated many of his books for what you would now call your Library of Congress, and they're still there. A long time later, they're still there. He expressed his passion for future America and for a small government by saying, I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the spoils of the people under the pretense of taking care of them. What does that mean? That's not really the way we talk today. He predicts future happiness, which means what? In the future, you're going to be happy if you can what? What does prevent mean? If I prevent Josh from throwing something in class, what am I doing? I'm stopping him. So Thomas is saying that he can predict that we'll be happy later if we can stop who? Stop the government from what? From wasting our things, saying that they're taking care of us. So really it's what we've been talking about in history, about keeping people in check, check and balances, which we have been talking about. So that's all I have to say to you today, but do you have any questions for me? Hudson?
If you died, how are you here? Yeah.
Well, you know, I came back in time, and that's just one of those really special things that I'm allowed to do sometimes, because otherwise, how would you ever get to meet Martha Jefferson?
You couldn't.
You couldn't meet her, so I'm allowed to come back.
We do that with Abraham Lincoln.
Charity, did you have a question?
That was the question.
That was your question. Does anybody have another question? Josh?
Why don't we do that with Abraham
We may later.
Lincoln?
Old Abe may come on.
Oh.
Anybody else? Any other questions for me? Okay, well, I have a few questions for you. Are you ready? I think you're ready. Because I know your history teacher. She's really good, and she's taught you most of this stuff. Right? Isn't she awesome?
She's right there.
Okay. So how did Thomas Jefferson, how did what he do influence American government? What really super important thing did he do that influenced our government? Hudson?
He wrote the Declaration of Independence.
He wrote the Declaration of Independence. So why was that so important? What did that declare? It's a declaration, so it declares something. It says something. What did it say, Michael? Do you remember? It was to England. Okay, it did kind of have a little bit to do with it. That's more of our Constitution. But what else? Which she did help write as well. What else? Hudson?
It declared our freedom.
It declared our freedom from Great Britain, from England. Yeah. So he was influential by saying, no, we are America. We're tired of the way we're being treated. We're not doing this anymore. You can change, or we're done. You think that was a big step? Was that easy to do?
No.
No, that was hard. You think he was scared? Yeah, he was scared. All he had known was England. He was an Englishman. That's what he knew. That was his home. He didn't know that they would be taken care of. He didn't know that America wouldn't be taken over by somebody else. But he knew that what was happening was not right, and that he couldn't stand for it anymore. It wasn't right to see his friends and his country treated that way. Okay, so if you don't have any further questions for me, I'm going to head on back out. Charity?
If you're not Miss Schmidt, then where's our teacher?
She'll be back in just a little bit. She's stepped across the hall. Eliza Rose.
How old were you when you had your first child?
I was really young. Back then we got married really young, so we had babies really young. But remember I said that when I was 22, I had a son. So I was probably in my 20s, my early 20s. Yes.
What were your babies' names?
You know, I had so many babies. I had Martha and Mary. Those were my two girls. Those were the ones that you would have known. And those were the ones who really did a lot of important
You named
things.
your baby Martha?
That was pretty common back then.
Wait, what was your
wanted to carry
second
that
name?
name on.
Why did you? Oh, what's your baby's name that you have right now? You
Oh,
said
my
you know Sammy. Sammy.
This is little Sam. This is
I thought it
Sam.
was
He's on his
Sam.
way. We think it's Sam. Could be Samantha. We don't know.
Samantha for a birthday.
Okay, well, I really appreciate your time today.